Hello there, and welcome back to another Patreon exclusive pattern drafting and sewing video. Today I wanted to make a simple white summer dress. I usually make a new white dress every July. It's sort of my birthday gift to myself that I do every year. I just turned 30 last Saturday, or the 10th of July, and so I usually make myself a white, for whatever reason, birthday dress, and this is going to be this year's. I was inspired by this dress from The Postman Always Rings Twice. I'm doing a little bit of a different neckline, but this kind of white dress with a cutout neckline was really inspiring to me when I watched that film, and I wanted to make something similar, so I actually bought this fabric last year after watching that film. I bought some plain white seersucker is all it is, usually pretty inexpensive fabric. Mine's 100% cotton, so I did go ahead and pre-wash this as well, because of course with the summer dress you want to be able to throw that right in the wash because it's hot out, you know? So sort of inspired by this dress and then also these patterns I saw floating around on Pinterest, I decided to give this sort of cutout neckline a try. And I wanted to go ahead and basically copy this neckline here from this pattern with the all-in-one sleeve. Obviously, you know, it's me. But with this kind of diamond cutout shape with the like short V that I do all the time, but then with a diamond kind of cut out below, plus the darts put up into that neckline. So I thought it would be fun to give a try. So I will show you how I got on over on the blue patterning table of doom, as always. All right, here we are, and I of course am tracing my all-in-one bodice block front here so I can make this little dress. I'm going to be using just my A-line skirt with this one today, but we can do some bodice modification here. I'll just draw in the dart that this pattern normally has, and then I will draw a line from that dart leg up to the apex so that I can go ahead and do some dart manipulation and draw it up here at the top as well. I'm going to add a center front seam on the bodice here, so I'm just going to add that seam allowance here along the center front as well, and then I'm going to draw a line to move the dart up into right here into the center front of the neckline. So I'm going to move my dart up here. Oh, and then I forgot I need to make this a V-neck, so let's do that first. Dang it. Make this into a short V, and then do that, like so. And the reason I added on that seam allowance first here is that so these points here up at the neckline will meet in the front, and I ended up actually adding in a couple of stitches so they would stay closed up here on my dress, so that's what I'm doing there. I'm just going over those lines here so you can see them a little bit better in purple, but I'm going to go ahead and have this be part of the neckline here. And I want to draw the rest of the neckline. I started cutting this out and then I was like, I do kind of want to figure out what the keyhole is going to look like before I really manipulate this dart here. But you'll see that in just a moment. Let me go ahead and cut this out. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and decide how I want my little neckline to come in here. Again, I always keep the apex in mind to decide how low to make these sort of things. This part here will be cut away, so we'll just slice that off. My markers are going everywhere here, as usual. Love that. And then I will cut all the way down to the apex, and then again I will cut up the dart leg from the waist, so I can close the waist dart and open it up into the neckline. Just close the waist dart like so, tape that shut, slashing and spreading our dart closed, like so. And so now we have this sort of funny situation up here. Now of course we could fill this in and use this as dart fullness, like you would normally do. But instead I'm going to actually just go ahead and draw in like the dart legs where they need to be 1.25 inches out from the apex, like I always do, like so. So here are the dart legs that I would need to sew this, but instead of leaving this dart fullness in here, I'm just going to draw out a 1/2 inch of seam allowance on either side of those dart legs and use this just as a like a seam line instead of a traditional dart. So you'll see how I sew this later as well. So instead of leaving all the full dart fullness in here, I'm just going to cut it away. You can always cut away the rest of the dart like this if you want to. There's not really usually a reason, just because up here I wanted to reduce bulk with the neckline, I decided to cut it away. And I just will close this up like I would if it were a dart, like so. And actually I'm going to tape that shut for now. I've just folded it along the dart legs. Tape that shut for now in order to be able to trace a facing up here. But you can see how this is going to shape the bust here. It's the same bust dart that would have been created from the waist, it's just up here in the neckline now. I'm just going to try and find a piece of paper big enough here to trace a facing up here. So just going to lay a piece of paper over the top of my neckline sort of area here and just trace through the paper to create a facing that matches the neckline underneath. I do end up actually not using this facing today and ended up fully lining the bodice instead, so I just used the same pattern piece, the fronts and the backs, again in a lighter weight cotton to line my dress today. I thought I was going to use a facing at first, but the seersucker fabric I used for this dress is on the sheer side, so I ended up just lining the bodice instead because I thought that would be nicer than seeing the facing sort of through the sheer fabric. So in the end I ended up lining this, but this is how you would make a facing for something like this if you were to be using a more opaque fabric perhaps than I was. But here is my diamond cutout dress front. This is the center front seam here, cut 2. This is the grain line still, 2021. And then this is my facing here, and I'm just going to go over my pencil lines from sketching this through the paper there. That's why it's nice to have some paper that has a little bit of transparency to it. I know a lot of people use tracing paper for pattern drafting, and that makes complete sense to me. But you can use any paper that will work, which is most paper, honestly. But the nice thing about having something slightly transparent like this is it makes it so easy to do facings. So I always want my facings to be at least 2.5 inches wide all the way along the neckline, but for this I was just going to create kind of like a bib almost shape on the inside just to encase the whole area in like a nice rounded off way. But again, of course in the end I ended up not using this facing pattern, but this is how I would do it, where I too make something make the same dress in more opaque fabric. And I do actually have another fabric that I would like to try and use the same bodice style for, so I'll probably use the facing pattern for that. Center front again, and the shoulder just to keep myself orientated here. Oriented? Sure. But that is how I would finish this with the facing. And then for the back of this, I'm just going to use the standard all-in-one bodice back, so I just have a tracing of that here just for the back. So this is my back of the block pattern. I just have a tracing of that and a facing for that. And these, I didn't change the neckline at the shoulder at all, so this still lines up no problem with the shoulder seam. So I can just use this back and round it off facing for the back of that. And then for the skirt of this, again, I'm just going to use my A-line skirt pattern. So I have the skirt front and back. Here is the card up to how to make the A-line skirt pattern here from the basic block skirt pattern here. I have a video covering that, so I'm just going to use the A-line skirt. And I am going to not cut this on the fold. I'll cut this with a little bit of seam allowance. So the front of the skirt has a center front seam as well to match up with the center front seam that I've added to the bodice here. But now I have my pattern all ready to go. I will and cut out all my pieces. Again, I'm just going to cut, I'll cut everything, nothing gets cut on the fold for this. I'll place things next to the fold, but nothing actually needs to be cut on the fold for this because I did add that center front seam just because I saw it in the vintage pattern, so I decided to keep that consistent. But I was trying to decide what to do about the grain line on this because the seersucker is a little bit like striped if you look right up close on it. So I was like, do I want to care about these stripes or do I not want to care about these stripes? And I really just couldn't decide if I wanted to, like, because you know how when I make striped dresses, usually I chevron them so that the stripes meet up at an angle in the front or at the front of the skirt. And I was like, do I want to cut this on the straight grain or do I want to have my stripes on an angle? And I kind of couldn't decide. So I ended up doing it so that the center front pieces, the skirt and the front of the bodice are on an angle and like chevroned. So if you're really close to me, you'd be able to notice, and probably you need to stand 6 feet back at least, you know, for safety reasons. But the way I usually line this kind of thing up with an all-in-one like this is I just line the shoulder seam up with a stripe, and that automatically puts the center front on an angle like this, usually, depending on where I've moved the darts to, but that works pretty well for this. And then I was still thinking about using my facing pieces here, but of course I did again switch to a lining, and I just lined this with a cotton voile because I had some around. So, you know, what do I have in stock is the question usually in life. And if I'm using something cotton, to preserve the like super washability of that, I will usually line it in cotton as well, because if you have cotton and then you go ahead and use like a Bemberg rayon lining, a Bemberg rayon lining is not as washable. It's more of a dry clean only kind of thing. Usually, I've never tried to wash one. It might be possible, but you definitely want to pre-wash. Any rayon has the potential to shrink and do weird things on you. Usually it's a dry clean only kind of fabric. So definitely pre-wash it if you intend on machine washing the garment later, because there probably is going to be some shrinkage to deal with, and you want that out of the way before you make it into a garment for sure. But this I ended up lining in cotton so that the whole dress was still 100% cotton, other than that nylon zipper in the back. So I could just toss it in the wash anytime, because again, for a summer dress, you like that ease of being able to throw it in the washing machine after a hot day out and about, you know? But the backs and the back of the skirt I did end up cutting on the straight grain, just following along with the stripes of this. So the stripes were still vertical in the back, but then they were slightly on an angle in the front, which means the front is cut on like a slight bit of bias, but that didn't really affect the drape of this too much, I don't think. This fabric was on the loosely woven side for a cotton, seersucker is, but still stable enough that I wasn't worried about it stretching too much on the bias at all. Especially once I lined the bodice, for example, in a straight cut piece inside, so nothing can get too stretched out up here in the bodice at least. Okay, so now that everything is cut out, I can go ahead and start marking my darts, of course. This is just the back, so I just have my standard darts in the back. Although I do, now after playing around with that Vogue sloper where the dart is so much taller in the back, and looking at the difference between the fit on that and the fit on my normal sloper pattern, I kind of do want to extend my darts up in the back of my pattern, like in maybe 1.5 inches, and just see if I like the fit of that better. Just because I do have a little bit of extra room above the dart on my back pattern, which is fine. It doesn't, like, usually it's not that noticeable, but I think that might be fixed by having my dart be a little bit taller. So I'm going to give it a try here soon. We'll see how it goes. Maybe the next version of this dress I plan on making, I will do that, because I do have a fabric here in the stash that I think might look good with this same neckline design. But here I'm just transferring my darts over with colored pencil and tailor's chalk, a combination of those two here. Mostly I use tailor's chalk on this because I do want this to wash off later, because it's a sheer white fabric. I wanted to be a little bit more careful about lines that could end up, you know, showing in the end if I wasn't careful about it. So at least with tailor's chalk, I think it's supposed to like wash away, hypothetically. So I was being a little bit more careful and diligent using actually proper materials today. What an idea. We all know that most of the time I just use colored pencil because if it's not going to be seen, who cares? I'm just transferring over the proper dart mark here for this sort of weird cutout dart that I've done. And here are my fronts, and I'm going to just mark my dart like point here with a pin just to help me mark that with a little bit of tailor's chalk again, using blue today on this white fabric. And then I'm going to actually draw in the seam allowance of these darts just because I want to make sure I get it sewn correctly. So I'm doing that with, again, some tailor's chalk here. Just drawing that 1/2 inch in so I don't make any mistakes when sewing these darts, because they are still a like functional dart that creates the shape of the garment, even if I do have the excess cut away. I'm going to pin them just like I would a dart, like so, and it's just a little bit of a smaller dart to sew today. The dart fullness is the same amount as it was when it was at the waist. It's the same exact dart, just moved into a new placement. It's just shorter, but it's still taking out the same like triangle of fullness to create the cone shape for the bust on the front. Then you can see here on the A-line skirt, I did cut this out with a little bit of seam allowance down the front. There's no reason to do that other than just I wanted to add a center front seam. Again, if this was a more prominent stripe, doing so would have meant that I could line up the stripes down the front like this and you would be able to see the chevroning. Of course, in this, again, you'd have to be looking very closely at this to notice the difference in the white on white seersucker here. But actually I started pinning those together and then I realized I wanted to serge those raw edges first, so I set them next to the serger instead. And I will do the same with the two pieces for the back of the A-line skirt as well. I'm just going to serge all the raw edges on these skirt pieces because I don't plan on lining the skirt at all. But before I can serge the raw edges of the bodice pieces, I want to go ahead and sew the darts on them. So I'm going to come over here onto the lovely Singer 99K and go ahead and sew my darts first. And I really didn't have to serge the bodice pieces of this because, again, it's going to be fully lined. But I ended up doing so anyway just because, again, this fabric was a looser weave of cotton, so I didn't want it fraying on me while I was working on things. So I figured I would just go ahead and serge the raw edges so I didn't have to worry about it as I continued working on the project. But here I will just put the, again, where I had marked the like seam allowance of this dart underneath the machine here and sew my dart as I would normally. And then, even though it's cut away, and then I just tie off the end of my dart like I always do. You've seen me sew a dart before, you know. Just because this one has the excess cut away doesn't mean the technique really changes at all. It just means I have seam allowance to press instead of a dart, but you'll see how I do that in a moment. And again, just sew off the end and tie it shut, as I do all darts. Even though this one is extra twisted. There we go. And I will do the darts on the back of the bodice, of course, which are still have all their fullness. Again, you could cut this down and have it be seam allowance if you wanted to. It just doesn't normally matter, but because I didn't want anything extra interfering with the neckline and bulking up the neckline area, that's why I had cut it away in the fronts. Alright, so I will go ahead and start pressing those darts. Of course, I'm pressing them towards the center of either the front or back, depending on what I'm working on. So here I'm pressing the back dart towards the center back. And again with this other one. Something like this 100% cotton presses very well, so it's always nice. And then here on the fronts, I'm going to go ahead and press this seam allowance down towards the front here, like so. Eventually, a lot of corners will need to be clipped on this once I have it sewn, the neckline sewn to the lining, but I will show you, cross that bridge when we come to it. But I'm just pressing that dart, or that seam allowance of the dart area, it's hard to know what to call this, down towards the waist, towards the center front / waist, I suppose. It's on an angle, of course. And then I will go ahead and, like I said, serge the raw edges of my bodice pieces, even though I will be fully lining it. I don't ever bother to serge the raw edges of the sleeve when I'm going to be lining a garment like this, or the raw edges of the neckline, because those are going to be fully encased. Not like the side seams won't be, but I usually am hemming something with bias so it's fully encased, or doing a facing where that's not going to receive any friction in there, so it's just better to not have any additional bulk. And so I always leave my neckline and sleeve hems unserged if I'm going to be finishing it with a lining or facing, that is. Oftentimes, if I'm just making a simple cotton sateen dress with my all-in-one sleeve, say, perhaps, or even with a regular sleeve, if I'm just making a simple cotton sateen dress, I will serge the edges of the sleeves because I'm just going to turn them up a 1/4 inch or whatever, or not a 1/4 inch, but like a 1/2 inch, and hem them. But it just depends on which fabric I'm using. For something like this, I knew with a full lining, I didn't need to bother serging it. It's hard to explain, sometimes, again, as I always say, it's hard for me to explain some of my decisions I make on the fly later on when I have to sit here and explain them. It all makes sense at the time when I'm doing it. Well, no, that's not true. Sometimes it doesn't make sense either. But as long as I have a finished garment in the end that's wearable, I consider it a job well done. All right, back here I can start assembling this bodice together. So I'm going to pin the center fronts together here, because that's going to be my first, or I guess my second step after the darts here, sewing the bodice together. So I'll sew this down the center here, just giving that a quick press, actually. And then I can also set the side seams of my skirt next to the machine and do those at the same time. So I'm just lining, and then I can also sew the center front of my A-line skirt together as well. So I'm pinning that together here to set next to the machine and be able to sew this seam at the same time as well. We all know how I like to work in batches, like I always say. I am a bit of a broken record. I repeat using the same design details often because I love them, as we saw in that recent lookbook here on Patreon, where a lot of the dresses was reusing the same elements over and over again. And even in these voiceovers, I end up repeating myself quite a lot just because I use the same set of processes each and every time. But, that's how sewing is. It can be quite repetitive, which is one of the draws of it for me, actually. It makes it almost like driving in some ways. I feel like sewing and driving are similar in that they use the same amount of brain power, where it's distracting you just enough so you can't go down like an anxiety black hole very far, or at least I can't, which is nice. So it takes up just enough of my brain power that I can almost think about something else, but not fully, Sewing and driving late at night, are they the same? Possibly. Here I can go ahead and iron those center seams open, and I ended up actually throwing in some top stitching on these as well, just to hold them down flat while I'm wearing the dress later. I just thought it would be nice to have them sewn down, so I'm going to go, especially in this white on white with white thread, you're not even going to really see this top stitching. Of course, if you wanted to do something like this and make the top stitching more visible, you could choose like a red or like a navy blue on white contrast top stitching, or even like a spring green on this would be nice, and just do lots of top stitching. Maybe do 2 rows of top stitching, 3 rows of top stitching instead of just the one as an accent. It's something that was definitely done as like a decorative element in the 1930s and 40s. So you could definitely do more decorative top stitching. Or if you have one of those machines that has lots of fancy stitches, you could always do one of like the fancy stitches, doing something like this as well. But I'm just using my straight stitch, set to like a medium stitch length, and in white here. And I'm just using the presser foot as a guide next to the seam so I can stitch about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch away from the original seam line, down one side and then up the other, like so. Just throwing in a little bit of top stitching. You really can't see what's going on here. That's the other thing. I always am like sewing with black, so it can make it hard to see what I'm doing sometimes. But it's no better in white here. In fact, I think it's probably worse and like less visible to see what I'm doing in white. Like a mid-tone fabric is probably best for showing how to do something, I think. Okay, and now I can really start assembling this bodice together, so I'm going to go ahead and sew the side seams and the shoulder seam of this all-in-one here. We all know how I love the all-in-one sleeve. I am going to make a separate video. I've shown a couple of times how to make this modification to the basic block, by the way, to create the all-in-one sleeve, and then of course I trace that pattern and use that as a block all the time because I, again, use the sleeve all the time. But I'm going to make a separate video just showing how to take the basic block and make an all-in-one sleeve block, just because I use it all the time, And I know people don't want to watch a whole like project video just to get this one modification. So I'm going to start doing some just simple modification videos or pattern drafting demonstrations over on the channel as well. So we'll see how those do. I mean, obviously, if it's not worth it, if no one wants those, then I shan't do them anymore, but it might be nice to have some simpler videos to refer to. And then if they're doing okay, then I will make a playlist of them and start doing more, maybe like one-off examples of how to do different styles of like sleeve or different styles of dart manipulation perhaps. Just because I need to slow down my clothing sewing, as we know, because I can't let my closet get too bloated again now that I've had that clear out this year. So one way to slow me down would be to be able to do example muslins and show how to do things without necessarily adding another dress to my closet, because we all know I already have quite a few. Not that I'll stop sewing for myself and doing full projects, I promise. I just can't do like 3 or 4 a month ever anymore. Like my 2020 sewing output was just, quite frankly, too high, you know? But sewing together my bodice here, 1/2 inch seam allowance as always, like so. I wonder if there's a way to like open some sort of like submission box somewhere where people could submit like photos of certain styles that they would like me to try and show how to do. A lot of times I get requests like, I wish you would try making some of the dresses from this catalog, and it's like, well, yeah, we looked at 100 dresses though. Which one did you like the most? So it would be nice if there was like a way to like vote on these things almost. So people could tell me like which style specifically they most wanted to see from something. So if there's any of the, catalog pages that I put up over on Pinterest that you're like, hey, page 90 of the catalog from 43, dress F, I'd love to see how to make that one. So if you have any specific requests like that, let me know. A lot of people have been asking for collars recently, so I actually am going to go ahead and do that on the main channel coming up real soon here. So I will be doing how to make or add a collar so you can make shirt dresses or collared shirts. So I will be doing some collar and placket situation stuff over on the channel shortly. But here I am pinning my lining, which I constructed the exact same way as the rest of this first bodice, pinning the lining to the fashion fabric at the neckline here, right sides together, and I'm just pinning around all these funky lines. We'll just leave the needle down and turn around these corners when we're over on the machine. But this is why I press the seam allowance down for those darts on both the lining and the fashion fabric. Everything lines up no problem here at the keyhole at the neckline. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew this all together, right sides together, along the keyhole and around the neckline up here as well. These are the shoulder seams that I'm making sure to match up and pin here. And I'm going to sew these together at the neckline, and then I will turn them right side out, press everything down, and then I'm going to serge them actually together along the center back and waist, and treat it almost as like something that would be flatlined from then on. So I'm finishing the neckline by bag lining it-ish, kind of, and then I will treat it by flatlining it the rest of the time, just because I felt like it would be nice to put the zipper in both layers of this bodice, for example, for additional stability. Again, just because it's a lightweight cotton fabric and I felt like I needed a little bit more heft back there, perhaps by the zipper. But here I am just sewing that neckline with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, of course. And I am using my fine silk pin, so I'm sewing right over them, no problem. We know how I am. But down to the first corner, leave the needle down, turn, keep sewing, maintaining that 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then we get to the like inverted corner, leave the needle down, turn the project, and keep sewing. Then once I get to the center front of the V here, I leave the needle down where I think it needs to be, and I kind of double check to make sure that I'm in the middle of that center front seam. And if I am, I will turn. So the other side of the neckline up to the other inverted corner here, like so. Leave the needle down, turn the project. This is just how I'm getting around the sort of zigzag shape up here for the keyhole of this particular design. And then up here around the curve of the neckline as more usual, and to the back, like so. And then I'll just need to clip my curves around the neckline and then clip the corners, both the like exterior and interior corners. Again, am I always hip with the actual terminology? No, but that's okay. We get it done anyhow. So I'm just clipping those corners right off, bloop, right next to the stitching, not like too close, like a millimeter away at least. And then I'm going to clip the center V and then clip these other corners so that everything can be flat and pressed nicely from the other side. And then up here, clipping the curve, clipping about every centimeter or so, trying to 3/4 of an inch maybe at most, along the curve of this so that everything will lay nicely once I turn it right side out. I usually use the end of the ironing board like this. I think it's a good spot to be able to get in here and really zhuzh things into place, as it were. And I'm using actually a piece of steel boning here to align my corners properly, like so. And things look a little bit like messy right here, but as long as you've cut or like puckered along the seams and corners, as long as you've clipped those curves and corners, as soon as you start really getting in here and pressing it, it should lay smoothly. I always remember when people were having such trouble in class getting things to lay smooth, and the teacher would immediately just open it up, clip the curves, and then it would be all fixed and be like, always clip your curves. That was always a repetitive lesson that I watched happen in fashion school. But I'm just using some pins here to kind of help align everything before I bring over a little bit of steam here. I actually burnt myself twice with the iron last week. Honestly, really. I burnt my hand. I like reached to grab something past the iron, and this iron gets so hot that like if you even get just too close to it, I feel like it jumps off, the heat jumps off the ironing plate and just, ugh. So I got a tiny burn on my wrist. And then I ended up getting a pretty sizable burn on the back of my elbow. You might see in the end of this video, when you watch me modeling this dress, you'll see there's quite a red mark on the back of my left arm right now. It's probably going to scar. I'm not too jazzed about it. And I brushed past the iron for a split second, and I have this like 3-inch burn on my arm. And I just can't believe how little you have to touch it for it to like 2nd degree burn you. Ugh. I'm a disaster. This is why people are like, oh, do you ever like do swing dancing or go to dances? Because that's something that some vintage people are into. And I'm like, my God, I can't even like function in day-to-day life without injuring myself or others nearby, because I'm not even like that clumsy. I'm just like minor injury prone, I guess. So the idea of dancing, that just sounds dangerous for me and everybody else. And here's what my neckline looks like all pressed from the outside. Very happy with how cleanly that came out. And then to hem the sleeves here, I'm just going to turn both the fashion fabric and the lining in towards one another a 1/2 inch, pin them together, and slip stitch all this down. I did that off camera today. Sorry about that. To be fair, I do finish anytime I line anything. That's how I finish most of the time, anything with an all-in-one sleeve where I've lined it like that. So now that my sleeves are all hemmed and turned inside like that, again, I just slip stitch this closed like I would a pillowcase or something. I'm actually going to baste the waistline together and then the center back opening of this together, the both layers. Again, I'm going to treat it kind of like a flatlining for the rest of this. So I'm going to serge actually this back edge and the waistline again with both layers here, just so they're all finished together. I should have just waited to serge the seersucker pieces until this step, but now there's just an extra line of thread in here. Oh well. But now that that is all kind of flatlined together, I will go ahead and attach the bodice and skirt together at the waist seam. So I'm just lining up the pressed open seam allowances for the side seams and the center front seams here and pinning those first, making sure those are aligned and that everything is in place. And then I can go ahead and pin the rest of the skirt to the bodice. Pretty constant step in my life. You won't see me use like dress patterns with no waist seam or like with double-ended darts instead. For me, I really liked the definition of a waist seam. Like it helps like, and like usually I make my waist of my dresses, speaking of like making my block pattern with a little bit of negative ease, I like the waist of my dresses to be a little bit smaller than the actual waist because I am so squishable. So again, my dresses have a 30-inch waist, and right now I probably have a 31 or 32-inch waist depending on the day because many cookies, a very stagnant panini. So like, is my waist 30 all the time? No, but the waist of my dress is always 30, and I'll just squish into that, so that doesn't really bother me. I like a defined waist, as we know. But after that waist seam is sewn, I can go ahead and press it open, and then it will be time to put the zipper into this dress. I will just be doing my kind of weird way I do lapped zippers now. But the way I have been doing my zippers lately is just to go ahead and match up the center backs and sew the seam from where the zipper will end down. So right here I'm just marking where this zipper comes to here on the skirt. Just putting a couple of pins there, then I will match it up with the other side. And then I can sew from those pins down to the hem. That's what I'm going to do for this. So here I am just matching that up. Making sure my waistlines match up. Making Make sure everything's hanging nicely and nothing's getting warped or stretched out of place. And I will just pin from those pins down to the hem again. And then sew that with the 3/4 of an inch seam allowance that this center back seam has. Just because there's a little bit of a larger seam allowance, just because this is where the zipper's going in and I like to have a little bit of extra room, usually. But I'll go ahead and sew this down to the hem, like so. Again, just using my normal, like, kind of 12 stitches per inch. It's pretty, like, medium stitch size on the smaller side. I was fixing a vintage skirt recently, and I was surprised how large the stitch length they had used to sew it in the first place. And of course, it was cotton thread, so it was not very strong anymore, so it was a good thing I was in there reinforcing it, because it's going to come apart on me. It's one of those things where it's like, this is why I keep a needle and thread in my handbag sometimes when I go out when I'm wearing vintage, because it's like, you never know when old thread might just give out on you. Now for the back zipper area of just the skirt portion, I went ahead and I did interface. That's what this is here. I have like this paused on this because I did not get good footage of this. I think I was pressed filming and thought I was filming when I wasn't. But I just put a little strip, like 1 inch wide, of fusible interfacing, lightweight fusible interfacing along where the zipper will go along the skirt opening in the back before I pressed each side the 3/4 of an inch back, just because the bodice has the 2 layers now with the lining, but the skirt portion doesn't have any extra support, and again, this fabric is kind of on the looser woven side, so I just wanted to give it a little extra stability down here by the zipper, so I just put some interfacing along the inside there. I'm sorry I didn't get footage of that. I was really hoping to, and I'm bummed that I missed the shot somehow. Sometimes filming mishaps, easy to do down here when you're like half focused on the project, half focused on filming it. But I will just go ahead and pin the folded edge of each side. I'll pin the, I guess when you're looking at it, right-hand side of the opening to the zipper tape, and I will stitch it, and I will stitch it right next to the zipper teeth here. Of course, switching to my zipper foot over here on the 99K. I'm just doing my zippers the same way I usually do. I used to always sew the back seam shut. It just depends on the fabric. If it's something I feel like can handle that, I will totally do it. But this seersucker, again, was a little more on the fragile side, so I just wanted to go ahead and iron each side individually instead of basting it shut. You may have seen me do that before. 2 different ways I do lap zippers, really. I still don't really like zippers, and I don't feel fully confident in them. If there was such thing as like a couture zipper class somewhere, I would totally love to take one, just so I can feel more confident in my zipper nonsense. But I just kind of do whatever works and ends up wearable, you know? But here I am stitching that folded edge down right next to the zipper teeth with my zipper foot here. As I get to the end, I always just remove the pins and move the zipper pull down out of the way by lifting the presser foot and leaving the needle down, lift presser foot, zipper pull out of the way. Sometimes it's more annoying than others. Back down and then just finish off up here. And then I can go ahead and pin the other side overlapped. And I had someone ask, I've had a couple questions actually over the years, ask, you know, don't you lose some width back here? Like, how much extra do you plan into your pattern for the amount that it overlaps? And like, I am overlapping this just to cover the zipper teeth. So like less than 1/8 of an inch. So I never worry about like building extra into my patterns or anything like that. It's overlapped, but it's not overlapped like a 1/2 inch. Anything that would affect the fit. It's just overlapped a tiny bit. So right here, I'm just aligning that other folded edge to just cover the zipper teeth, but I'm not overlapping it like a ton. The more you overlap it, the more it doesn't line up at the bottom of the zipper anymore. So like it's just pulling over the teeth, coaxing it over the teeth. It's not overlapped very much at all. And then I switch to the other side of my zipper foot here. Just the way that this zipper foot is designed. Of course, modern machines' zipper feet look kind of different. Some people use invisible zippers. Not my jam. To me, invisible zippers are not as reliable. They can sometimes break. So I'd rather just put in a regular zipper. Honestly, I'd rather use like really nice metal zippers, but they're harder to find in the right color all the time. And like in good condition and stuff like that, because not everyone, or they're not always making new metal zippers anymore. Since most of the world has switched to nylon. But this is the kind of thing that I hope to upgrade in the future. But these zippers from, I think they're YKK? I can't remember. From Mood have never failed me, so I've never had a Coates & Clark nylon zipper fail me either, so I just trust regular zippers more than invisible zippers, though. And invisible zippers are a modern thing, so they are going to give more of an even more modern touch to your garments if you're using them. It's most historically accurate for 1940s and 50s garments to use a metal zipper, but of course I don't care that much about accuracy, but just fun fact to be known. That's part of the way you can recognize true vintage when you're out thrifting is if it has a metal zipper, it's much more likely to be a 40s or 50s dress. But I have that other lap side sewn down now, and my zipper is in. Woo! It's functioning. I'm just gonna trim these zipper tape down up here, and then I usually just melt the ends of that because, again, the zipper is nylon, with a like barbecue lighter I have down here. I don't have a regular lighter down here for some reason, so I have like this long, like for starting your charcoal briquette lighter down here. But I just trim off the zipper tape like so and just melt the ends of it. Some may find this a little bit scratchy. I've never like noticed this while wearing a dress. I guess I'm not very sensitive to these kinds of things. But I will go ahead and make sure this aligns, and I will end up putting a little hook and eye up here. I had to use like a tiny hook and eye too, which is a bummer because I didn't have any silver ones, because of course most of the hook and eyes in my stash are black because most of the things I sew are black. Yeah, as we know. But to hem this dress, which is all that's left now, for the bottom hem, I am going to cut some more bias tape out of some spare white cotton voile here. So that's what I've done here, just 2 inches wide strips on the 45-degree angle of that, and then ironed into bias tape. You may have seen me do this before on the channel. I also have a whole video about like different hem finishes, or not hem finishes, but like seam finishes, including hemming with bias. So I can put a card up to that. I'm just going to go ahead and pin this along the right side of the hem along the bottom edge. Sew this on with 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I will fold it on to the inside. And then I will hand stitch it down to finish. Of course, didn't get a shot of that, unfortunately, because this is the part of the project where it's late at night, and I'm like, they've seen me hem before, right? And I'm skipping filming every step, which is bad. Slap on the wrist for me. I do try and be good about filming every step, but then every once in a while I'll have a mishap with the camera, or it'll be like midnight and I get too lazy. Dang it! So I'm sorry about that. But after ironing the hem into place and then stitching it down with my little long and short stitch that I usually do for hemming things, I just like to hand hem things. There's many different stitches you can employ to hand hem things, but I just usually just use like a long and short stitch, or like a prick stitch, I guess maybe is what that would be called. Who knows? Again, the names of hand stitches, not my forte, unfortunately. One day I'll get better at it. And here is my finished white seersucker dress. Of course, the rest of the silhouette of this is very similar to a lot of things I make with the simple A-line skirt and the all-in-one sleeve, but I think this neckline, actually, I'm very happy with how it came out. I think it's very pretty without being like too sexy, I guess. I get the question sometimes, like, why do I prefer like modest necklines or modest clothes? And it's like, I never thought of it that way before. I guess it just doesn't really enter my mind, like the question of, ooh, is this sexy enough or is this too sexy? I don't ever really think about that kind of thing, just because it's just way outside of my purview as an ace person who is never trying to attract anyone else. I just make things that I like and like suit my own taste, or like that I want to see or wear. So I never really think about that kind of thing, but I guess this is a little bit more of a flirty detail going on here in this summer dress. I actually do want to try this same bodice pattern and use another fabric that I have here in the stash to make something else soon with a pencil skirt. Try and make something with the same bodice, but like a little bit more 50s with a fitted skirt. I have a thicker, I think it's called cotton ottoman that I want to try this in. So we'll see how that comes out. You might see the fruits of that experiment over on Instagram soon here if I can get my act together and find time to squeeze in making that dress as well. I hope you enjoyed seeing how this bodice style comes together. It's actually a lot easier than I figured it was going to be. For some reason I thought it might be a little bit tricky with the cutout neckline and the darts coming together at the same time, but turns out it was no problem at all. So I was really glad and relieved when I started trying it that it was going to work. As always, thank you so much for your support here on Patreon and paying my salary, making what I do possible. It's all down to you that I'm able to keep doing this as my job, so thank you. And I, of course, will see you again here real soon for more pattern drafting. Bye!